hear from, well, actually, I don't know where he's from, is Dr. Bruce Lipton. Doctor, where are you?
California, and happy.
Well, welcome to the program. Good to have you.
I'm glad to be here. We have some exciting things to talk about.
This whole area is incredibly exciting. I don't know if you follow the program at all, but we've done some things with consciousness that, well, hey, they scared me. I've been doing this kind of thing for years. In your book, The Biology of Belief, Unleashing the Power of Consciousness, Matter and Miracles, you write about how some sort of scientific epiphany precipitated instantaneous personal transformation in your life. That must have been some very special moment. I know that people, for example, don't just resign tenured positions at big universities unless something really radical happens.
Well, I'll tell you, it was the biggest shock of my life because I was conventional professor teaching the kind of things medical students get about how biochemistry and genes control life, and teaching the concept essentially the human body is like a machine, and that medicine is involved with changing the parts and making it run right and all that. So yes. It doesn't leave any room for spirituality and all those other kind of things, which were never actually part of my life.
Right.
And I was working on the stem cells, and well, people think, well, stem cells, that's that recent thing that's just been happening. It's like I actually started working on stem cells, cloning stem cells, back in 1967, so it's almost 40 years ago, in fact. And the biggest surprise of my life were the lessons that those cells showed me, and on that particular night was the understanding of actually how cells were controlled, and what was unique about it is this was about 15 years of research that took me away from genes, the belief that genes control life, which everyone else was on that path. And I started recognizing that genes indeed were not controlling life. And when I found out what controlled life, I was shocked into another understanding, another reality. And interesting, I mean, although I got the consciousness hit me right there at that moment, it still took me a bit of time to realize that we are programmed. And even though I was consciously aware of this new understanding about that we are spiritual entities, that we're not even in the body, and this was through a molecular understanding of how the cell worked, it just floored me because I needed to learn how to put that into my life, not just the awareness of it. So there was a little bit of a lag period, and I think this is important because there's a tendency to think that if we just know something, then you know that's going to change our lives. And this gets into the issue of the consciousness and the programming of patterns and behavior, which came out of this work. And
okay, well, it may have been an epiphany for you, but I'm still not sure that I get it.
Okay, well, let me tell you how it works. It was this, the concept that genes control life. This is what's being taught in schools right now, and it's in every textbook everywhere about the concept, something referred to as genetic determinacy,
right?
Which means that the genes that you get at conception are essentially blueprints for the rest of your life, and that
right.
You live your life through this. And what the issue was when I started working on these stem cells, one of the big things that I found out right away is that the character or behavior or traits of the cells change when I put it in one culture environment or change the environment and put them in another environment. They change their behavior, they change their expression, that they were healthy or sick, or they changed into different kinds of cells. And
are you suggesting it's adaptation?
Well, it's basically, it is a dynamic process where life is continuously reading the environment and adjusting the biology to conform to the perception of that environment. So it's not your genes are not your fixed fate. Genes are potentials. What you do with those potentials are based on how you see the environment. And this was the big thing. I mean, after all these years of thinking you want to change your life, you're going to change your genes. And now all of a sudden it says, you want to change your life, you have to understand how if you just change your perception of the environment, your whole life can change. So you can talk about, for example, a person who has terminal cancer, and they have bought into the story that this is the end, and their life is waning right now, and all of a sudden they just get this belief change that says, no, I'm not going to buy that. I'm not buying that. And they get up and they get out and they exhibit what's called a spontaneous remission. It's like, what happened in this case is they changed something about their perception. Belief changed. You can see it in another case, multiple personalities. Multiple personalities, and one personality can have blue eyes, and then switch to the other personality and have gray eyes in
really?
less than, yes, in
really?
less than a minute.
That's documented.
Yes, and what else is documented is this, is that they can have allergies in one personality and less than a minute later change personalities, and those things that would have caused a severe allergic reaction just a minute before.
Oh, okay, slow up. I really need to understand that this is true. You're saying that a person with multiple personalities,
Yes.
One of them can have blue eyes, but when they switch personalities, actually it's documented, the eyes
Change color right there in front of your face. And this is hard kind of stuff to believe, right?
It is, yes.
And yet it's exciting because it's a pathology in the sense that they're not in control of it, but it represents an ability that we have the power of changing our expression when we change our perception of life.
Doctor, where can a person do some reading, Bruce, where can a person do some reading to verify that, for example?
Okay, there's an organization of it was a dissociation. I'll get it and then we can post it on the line, okay? There's an organization for dissociation studies, dissociation being people separating from their personality and acquiring other personalities. There's a big organization that studies this, and there's data to all this effect. Even, the story, The Three Faces of Eve, I think that movie that came out. Do you remember something like that?
Yes, oh yes, of course.
Well, I met that woman, and she's actually one of the first ones that she had a severe allergy to strawberries that caused her to get hives in one of her personalities. And when she changed personality, that allergy didn't affect her.
That I believe. Let's go back for a second to spontaneous remissions. Now, I know that's true. That happens.
Yes.
I don't know how frequently. I think it's fairly rare.
But it happens to which people express it. This is important. What is uniform about those that express it versus that don't?
What is? I assume that you looked at studies of spontaneous remissions. How many have there been?
Oh, the number's in thousands, but in the sense that the problem is that when you try to document it, then there's a take back where they say, well, the original diagnosis wasn't necessarily correct all of a sudden. And this is the issue because it doesn't conform to an understanding that medicine likes to play with, except they're very aware of it. It's called the placebo effect. And what it really represents is, what is the placebo effect? It's an ability to heal yourself based on the belief that whatever you're doing at that moment is something that will effectively heal you.
Yes, as long as you believe it will work.
Yes, and people should know this as well. There's an equal and opposite effect called the nocebo effect. And that's the one that says if you are told that you can't do something about it or that it's too late.
I'm sorry, son, you have a brain tumor. You have 6 months. It's irreversible and inoperable.
That belief system itself will promote that situation. And it's a very important understanding because it says, look, placebo, nocebo, it's the same concept. It's basically, it says what you believe and your perceptions will change the biology that you're expressing. And this is actually a new understanding, and it's not that new. In fact, science has actually been publishing information about how this mechanism occurs since 1990. And it's a new understanding in the sense that it's not in the textbooks. It's been in the leading-edge research for at least the last 15 years, and it's a concept called epigenetic control. And what does that mean? Well, genetic control is what we were talking about before. Genes control life.
But doesn't this leave a doctor who buys into what you're saying right now in a terrible position? Because if he tells a patient he's got an inoperable fatal tumor, then he has just dispensed the piece of information that's going to kill that person.
At exactly the same time, it's not a helpful situation, and it's been an issue because when you talk to doctors, their programming is not to give false hope. And so the significance about that is that it's an important program because if you don't give false hope, meaning it's hope that you don't have anything you can, there's no evidence for. So
yes.
I'm going to tell you something could happen here, but I don't have any evidence. They call that false hope. So the significance is you take away from their arsenal of healing abilities, you take away the ability of suggestion that they could influence the person because the idea was they don't want to be held liable for anything. And as a result, it's like, okay, this is what you have. And it's an issue it's an unfortunate issue of legal issues and medical issues intermixing right there. It's very difficult because a doctor is really obliged not to offer something that he can't scientifically attest to.
But if, in fact, the human mind is capable of reversing the otherwise scientifically thought to be irreversible, then there's an obligation on the part of the healer who's taken an oath to do the very best he can to include this.
Right.
This is going to be very hard, though, to get into traditional scientific literature. It's just and medical literature.
It's actually they're trying to wean it out of the literature right now. The drug companies are trying to remove studies of placebos. And the reason is because it contaminates their studies. Many of their drugs are no better than placebos. Prozac is scientifically not really of any value above a sugar pill, and that is a scientific fact that the federal government, this psychologist Erwin Kirsch at the University of Connecticut, he had to actually sue the government's Freedom of Information Act to get the test results on these drugs, and it's found out that he's reported there's a number of papers on it, that the fact is that that Prozac and Zoloft, those kind of drugs, are no better than a placebo, and it's very hard because you can get those people who take this drug that will swear on their lives
that
this is what did it.
Oh, yes.
And yet, of course, and it's like, oh, well, I'm happy that happens. There are a lot of people that could have sworn before that Laetrile cured their cancer, and it did, but it wasn't really through the Laetrile. It was that they took it with the belief that this was the most fantastic cancer cure ever, and they started to do this. So the issue is, I mean, how can you do this? And what we're talking about seems like magic. It's like if I change my belief or perception of what I see, I change my biology, and the answer is through the new understanding called epigenetic control. And the word epi is key here because that prefix epi means above. So the word, and this is a new area of study.
Above genetic control.
That's exactly what it says. And what it represents is this. We used to think that genes were these autonomous units. You walk down the street, and all of a sudden a gene will say, well, it's time for cancer or something. A gene gave you cancer, and we gave all this credit and power to genes. And here's a simple truth. A gene is a blueprint. It is exactly that. What it means is this. The body is made out of proteins. These are very complex molecules. That the complexity needs a blueprint to make them. The gene is a linear string, which is a blueprint to make these proteins. And why that's important is this. Go to an architect's office, and he's working on a blueprint on his desk. Stand behind him and ask him, is that blueprint on or off? And he'll look at you. What do you mean it's on or off? Well, you talk about a gene being on or off, and the reality is, boy, have we made a big mistake. The fact is, as the contractor would tell you, the blueprint's not on or off. It's whether I read the blueprint or I don't read the blueprint that makes all the difference. And that's what medicine is now beginning to realize, is that the genes don't turn on and off. It's whether the cell reads the genes or the cell doesn't read the gene. And all of a sudden, then you have to back up and say, yeah, but then who's in charge of what the cell reads?
Right. And the answer to that?
The skin or membrane of the cell, which is in sense, in human embryology, our brain and our nervous system is derived from the skin as well. And the skin, you say, well, the skin is the brain, and the answer is, of course, if you think about it, it's the interface between the organism and the environment. So one side of the skin is reading the outside world, the other side of the skin is reading the inside world, and by processing that information, the skin can adjust the biology to meet the needs of the environment.
I thought the skin, for example, was simply providing a signal to the brain, kind of like an input of information.
Yeah, in embryology, those that have out there may have heard the words. In embryology, you start with a single egg, you fertilize it, it forms a ball of cells, and the next stage is called a gastrulation, which it's a funny word, but it really means that the embryo, the cells, have stratified into 3 layers, an outer layer, a middle layer, and an inner layer. These layers are called, right in sequence, the outer layer ectoderm, the middle layer mesoderm, and the inner layer endoderm. Derm means germ layer. So ecto means outer. So the outer layer of the embryo, there's 3 layers. The outer layer is called ectoderm. Each one of these germ layers is responsible for providing very specific organs or tissues of the body.
Right.
The ectoderm only provides for 2 things, the skin and the central nervous system. The central nervous system is formed from the back of the embryo. The skin of the back turns in and forms what is called a neural tube. and that becomes the spinal cord and the brain. And so what was the point is, well, the cell's skin is the brain. The human skin, the derivative of the skin from the back, actually becomes the brain itself. And it says the same thing, and this is a very important point, is that when I tell students this when I was teaching in medical school, they see themselves, we each see ourselves, if we look in the mirror, as this singular entity, a single person. I look in the mirror, I see Bruce right there, and I say, well, that's one thing. And the reality is, that is a misinterpretation for this reason. If I would shrink you down to the size of a cell, you would see that you are actually made out of living units. The living things that make you are the cells. You are a community of cells. In fact, maybe up to 50 trillion cells in that community. What's the point? It's like, well, you look at yourself as a singular thing, but in truth, you're a harmonious, when you're healthy, community of 50 trillion cells interacting together with a just like a metropolis. I mean, they exchange food and money and energy.
So so we're sort of a totality of brain.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Dr. Bruce Lipton is my guest from the high desert in the middle of the night. Lots to be learned this night about consciousness and the nature of what we really are. We tend to think of ourselves in such a separate way, our skin, all the rest of us in our brain. That's all separate, right? Since Dr. Lipton was involved actually in cloning human stem cells, it's an irresistible question to take you back to that research, doctor, and ask you about the, the advisability of the race we have going on right now with cloning, and eventually, I suppose, with genetic tampering and changing, and we seem on the precipice of this incredible revolution. Do you think that we're wholly on a wise course here?
Absolutely not. And in fact, it's real interesting in this regard, because all of us have stem cells in us right now. And there's an interesting, philosophical point, if you think about it, is that if we all have stem cells, then why is it that the pharmaceutical industry, for example, has to identify how to make those stem cells work? Almost like a joke, like God gave us stem cells but didn't give us a way to use them. The fact is, we have stem cells, and they are quite usable in our system, and yet it's based on perception of the system, what those stem cells, what's going to become of them. It's just like I said, I start with stem cells, I put them in this environment, they form this, I put them in another environment, they form something completely different, and then you start to realize it's the environment that was controlling the development of those stem cells. And in our world, in our belief system, there's this tendency to believe that we are not like a renewing kind of organism, that we can't repair and replace ourselves. So that's a belief. And yet, unfortunately, that perception gets in the way of the operation of the stem cells and prevents us from healing ourselves, because we have a tendency to believe that we can't heal ourselves.
But we can.
Yes, we can, and amazing things happen, and then we call them miracles, and people try, again, there's always, these are exceptions to the rule, and sort of like, look, Roger Bannister was the first guy to run the 4-minute mile. He was the exception to the rule, but once he did it, other people saw that they could be exceptions to the rule and changed, and many people were able to run a 4-minute mile after he did it once. And
that's true.
Similar kind of thing here. We have to recognize that we have abilities that have been essentially programmed out of us regarding our own ability to heal ourselves. I mean, there were essentially, there were a million years of humans before there were doctors, and they managed themselves very well. And the fact is, we have bought into a perception that we are frail, that we live in a world and everything is out there to get us.
Well, are you suggesting the science of stem cell research, eventually replacement, I guess, is a sort of a fraud? In other words, it's not the active ingredient in the cure?
No, I really, it's not so much a fraud, it's a misdirection, because it's our belief system that has propagated us to think that these are just mechanical devices, and you throw in the right chemical, and this mechanical device is going to do a miracle for you, when in reality, if they come up with a chemical that controls those stem cells, guess what? It must match a chemical we already have in our body, because if God gave us the stem cells, it wasn't without the key to use them. And so the fact is, we actually have to recognize that it is within ourselves, this ability to heal ourselves. And it's been something that we've been programmed out of, and it's based on perception. Just think about it: that an infant is born with a doctor that goes to the doctor for checkups on its health all the time. During its young period, anytime it gets sick, the information is, well, if you're sick, I have to take you to the doctor. And if we get around to understanding this new understanding of epigenetics, how our perceptions control our biology, and you start to see a program that a child receives when it's young that says, when it's sick, it's not up to itself to heal itself. Then you have to take it to some specialist to heal it. And the reality is then that becomes a perception, and then that is then what controls the healing. And in fact, it's interesting how many people have that perception, and actually when they get sick, on the way to the doctor, they already start to get better, because once you engage the steps that you've put in the way of healing, then the healing process can begin again.
Boy, are you right about that. Boy, are you ever right about that. What you just said, I had a pretty bad flu not too long ago, and it just went, the temperature went on and on and on and on. And after so many days of having a very high temperature, I said to my wife, okay, that's it. We're going to the hospital. So we get in the car, and we've got about an hour drive from here in Pahrump, Nevada, to Las Vegas to the hospital where I went. And I'm telling you right now, doctor, by the time I got there, my temperature had fallen.
Mm-hmm.
I was feeling better for the first time in days and days and days. And this is all in the one, from that moment, that instant of decision to go ahead and go to the doctor, to the hour drive to get in there, it was almost like, why was I there?
Absolutely, and we have these powers, and it's funny because we live in a world where we've been taught that these powers don't exist, and since the biology, which that epiphany really led me to, is the nature that every cell is, and technically every cell is a programmable chip, and that the human body is an integration of 50 trillion chips, and that the programmer is not inside the cell.
Huh.
And this is the part that blew me away, because I realized our identity isn't in the cell, it plays to the cell. And this became part of the epiphany of how that membrane works, and that was this night of transformation where I realized, oh my God, all those years I was teaching these students about genetic control, and they're still getting the same message. And it is now, but it's been 20 or more years since I caught on to it, but conventional science in the last 10 years has fully recognized this, and yet it's not coming out to the mainstream very quickly, because an interesting loophole is that when people know this, then they're in power of their own health, and there's a lot of interest that are not interested in seeing that happen.
Huh. And I'm sure the drug companies are not all that interested in seeing something like this breaking loose.
They make money on selling pills. If you could heal yourself with energy and you can't sell the energy, then they're not interested in promoting that. And it's an important understanding, because I have to really stand here and say, look, medicine is getting a bad rap because it's not living up to whatever it's been promising. And there's a fact that is so, it irritates me so much, because this fact is so important and not revealed, and that is that the leading cause of death in the United States today is the medical profession. And it's not, and it's a fact by numbers. I mean, I could give you Gary Null's website. He has an article, Death by Medicine, with all the statistics. And the fact is, the AMA said they were third in the leading cause of death themselves. So the medical profession admitted to being third leading cause of death, and they did it with estimates. And then what Gary Null did, he said, rather than the estimates, let me just get the real numbers, and let me know what the numbers say. And the numbers were staggering. 780,000 people die from medical intervention, not because of the sickness they came with, but because of the consequence of the intervention. And then all of a sudden it's like, and now this is my point, if there's a soapbox, please, it's not the medical doctor's fault. It's not their fault at all, because it's the academic fault and it's the pharmaceutical industry's fault.
Nor, by the way, is it necessarily saying that physicians are unneeded. People still fall down, break bones.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, listen, physicians do this. There's nobody better in the entire world than, if you have trauma, the medical profession is the place to go. You want to fix something, cut it out, replace it, tie it up. These guys do miracles, okay? But when you want to get down to the mechanisms of why something happened, why do we have a cancer? What causes Alzheimer's? How come diabetes is, this big issue? Well, these aren't trauma. These are other things. And here's the problem. Medicine knows the body as a physical device, a mechanical device, and can treat it like a repair person. Says, I got to take out the exhaust pipe, put a new pipe in. I have to put a new bypass around this carburetor and right here like this. That's easy to do. But when it comes to understanding the mechanics of how it works, they don't really have an understanding because they're still being taught the concept that genes control life. And let's straighten this out for the audience right now. A simple point. If genes control life, which is the belief, and the genes are in the nucleus of the cell, which is this large organelle inside a cell, and genes control life, then there's a simple fact. If you take the genes out and throw them away, there's no control left, and life should stop. And this process is called enucleation, and I actually did this with my cloned cells, is I destroy the DNA. It's not working at all. It's done. And what happens is the cells still go on and live and still make all the responses that they would.
Oh, no, that's fascinating. You destroyed the DNA in cells just to see what would happen, and you're suggesting nothing happened.
Well, it didn't change their behavior. I can tell you exactly what happened at some point. And it's a funny thing about it because we've been up to now saying that the genes control the cell as if the genes are the brain of the cell. In fact, many textbooks actually say that. And the fact is, if you take the brain out of an organism and throw it away, by definition, that organism is going to die.
Yes.
And we buy that, but it turns out the genes and the nucleus is not the brain, it's the gonad of the cell. It's reproduction. It doesn't have an idea in the world what needs to be turned on and off. The genes are not intelligent, and we've given them this intelligence. So basically it says, well, what happens when you take the genes out and throw it away? And the answer is, at some point, the cell will die because it was using those genes, those blueprints, to replace the building blocks of the machinery of the cell. If I throw away the genes, there's a point where all of a sudden I'll need a protein to do a function, and I won't have the blueprint available, and then at some point, that's when the cell will stop.
All right, this is going to seem a little off track, or maybe it's not. There was this crazy story that I read a few years ago. I've got it in front of me right now, called Mike the Headless Chicken.
Yes.
Now, this chicken had its head cut off.
Mm-hmm.
Only trouble, this is pretty horrible stuff. It didn't die, and the owner kept feeding it by pouring stuff down its headless neck. I swear to God, this is true.
Yeah.
By pouring food down its headless neck.
Yeah.
And in every other way, this chicken went on to lead a normal, as much as you can without a head, normal life. It's not possible, only it actually happened.
Yeah, I'll tell you, here's the truth about yourself. I'll tell you what. We could take your digestive tract. I cut it from your mouth out all the way down to the stomach, the guts, all the way down to the rectum. I take it out. If you put it on a table, stick a piece of food in one end, and it will digest the food and eliminate the waste at the other end. The controls are built into its own self, so that the process of putting food in will engage all the next steps, and that we now know that things like walking and standing, a lot of that has to do with actual spinal cord information.
Apparently so, which goes back to the brain is sort of everywhere contention, right?
Every cell has a brain, and that's the important thing, and that in your community of cells, that there's a distribution of the workload. I mean, that's what the nature of a community is, to share awareness. That's why the first 3 billion years of life on this planet, there was 3 billion years of living things. You know what? They were all single cells. They were like yeast and bacteria and amoebas and some paramecia and algae.
So then, Doctor, in this headless chicken,
yes,
the spinal cord left intact and the rest of the chicken was enough for this chicken to function normally as a chicken without a head.
As long as he put the food in there and the chicken didn't have to do any consideration about what it had to do, the rest of it is a mechanical device. It's sort of like people that get put on life support systems. Their brain's not working. The rest, as long as you feed it, the body will continue to run. There's an intelligence throughout the entire body. Every cell is intelligent. That was the nature of like the stem cell research. It's like, it's interesting. I would take stem cells from muscular dystrophy patients, put them in the tissue culture, and you know what? They grew better in the tissue culture than they did in the patient. And the reason was they necessarily weren't having the problem. It was the environment inside the patient that was toxic.
Wow.
And so it's a whole new understanding, and it's very, very important because it says, look, we are not victims of genes. We can rewrite which genes that we use on a day-by-day, minute-by-minute basis. It's a way of staying alive in a dynamic world, is the ability to change which genes are being read at any time in order so your biology will meet the demands of that world.
So if you were diagnosed with, I don't know, Alzheimer's, for example, how would you proceed with the understanding that you have and that diagnosis in your hand? How would you proceed?
The first thing I would try to find out is where's the cause of the problem. The Alzheimer's, let's say, is actually the symptom of the problem. That's the consequence of something going wrong. Not it itself is the problem. It is the consequence. Now, the issue is, where do things go wrong? Well, you could have something physical go wrong, like trauma could cause a problem. You know, blunt force trauma is certainly going to interfere with the nervous system and stuff like that.
Yes, but that kind of thing aside.
Yeah, the main thing that we now know is the concept called autosuggestion. Meaning, it's also psychoneuroimmunology is another example of that. Meaning, at some point, we used to ascribe all the control to something within the cell, the genes, and now the control is being sent up the line, up to the interpretation of the nervous system, and so the genes are more or less obedient to the central nervous system, which makes sense for this reason. Every cell is intelligent. Every cell, I could take it out of your body, put them in a tissue culture dish, they'll grow, they'll be happy, they'll multiply, and all this kind of stuff. And every cell is independently looking at the world and responding to, whatever it has to do to adjust its biology to stay alive.
All right, but once again, here you are with Alzheimer's. I'm asking how you personally would proceed.
Okay, and the thing is, I'd have to go back and find out what kind of belief system would I be involved with that would support this process. And I'll give you a couple examples, because even knowing people that personally that were very dear to me that ended up with this, and I could see right away what one of the big issues. There are two main issues. One is that when people get cut off and their lives are sort of like they're getting older, they lose social contacts. It has been demonstrated that this loss of social contact is one of the primary causes of senile dementia, including Alzheimer's. Basically, it says the brain is like any other tissue organ system in the body. The more you use it, the more it develops. The less you use it, it will automatically dismantle itself because the biology is efficient. It just says, if you use it, then I'm going to keep it here. And if you're not going to use it, then we're taking it apart because we're not maintaining it for a trophy, the body that is. So the body will adjust to its use. And they now find, as I said, and these are references that can be off my website, that people can get off the website about this, is that it now recognizes that the vast majority of senile dementia is due to lack of use of the brain. So
otherwise,
that's one thing right
atrophy,
there.
Right?
Atrophy of the brain, because you lose your contacts, you lose your community of people, and then you start to go internally more at that point, and then your skills start to dismantle themselves. That's one thing. And then there's a pathological thing that could also cause, and that is people who are being leaned on by so many other people, like they're in demand to keep the show running, let's say.
Yes.
And the pressure is like so much that the only way out is to disconnect. And so that there would be how can a thought cause that? And the answer is, let me alone. and this is really important, because the thoughts that we have in our head are actually directives that are being sent to the cell. So you might sit there at the stoplight and hear these thoughts running in your head like it's entertaining your head. Well, in one sense, they may be. In the other sense, you have to recognize this. All those thoughts are being broadcast to 50 trillion cells. And these cells are who you are. This is the collective community. Their collective consciousness is our consciousness. And the reality is, so we're living in this community, and our central voice, meaning our central nervous system, is sort of like the government talking to the cells. And psychologists tell us 70% or more of those thoughts in your head while you're at that light are negative and redundant.
All right. Doctor, hold it right there. So, Dr. Bruce Lipton, I should say, and we're talking about, in a way, consciousness, the cellular consciousness, if you will. And I want to head off in a direction for a second, Doctor. There are some, let me first ask you, how do you define, or would you attempt to define consciousness? What is consciousness?
Well, it's an emergent property in the sense that every cell is sentient. It's very, very much observing its world. But when you put the 50 trillion together, there's an energy of an awareness among all 50 trillion cells. They're all like listening to the same station. And as a result, this energy of awareness is circulating through the system. There's more to it as well, though, because there's an identity factor that comes in that distinguishes each human from being a separate entity. Mm-hmm. And I mean that in the sense that if I try to take my cells and put it into you, Art, your immune system is going to say these aren't mine. And the question is, well, who's or who, and how do you know whose is? And the answer is that on the surface of the cell, this membrane we talked about, there are a set of antennas. And these are receptors, and they're in fact a community of them are called self-receptors, receivers of self. And the significance about that is that each of us is a unique identity as distinguished by these protein antennas. If I take my antennas off my cells are generic. If I can implant them into any human, they won't be rejected. If I take my antennas off and put yours on my cell, I would reject that cell if it was put back in my own body. You would accept that cell as yours. And so the point is you can transfer the ownership by attaching, your personal set of antennas on them. Well, the interesting part about that is that the signal isn't from the antennas. The antennas are downloading a signal. And so this is the thing that freaked me out because I didn't believe in spirituality until I realized that my identity is an environmental signal that comes through these antennas. If the antennas are on my cell, then the cell will respond to me. If I take the antennas off, then the cell is generic and will not have that same response. I put yours on, they respond to your signal. And when I realized it, it's sort of like a PIN code to get into the operation of the cell, that this is an outside identity. And when I realized that, the first moment was, oh my gosh, my identity is playing through this cell. And what really hit me at the first moment of this instant of this epiphany was, yeah, but if the cell dies, did that change? Did the identity die in the broadcast, so to speak?
Boy, is that a big question. It's out there in the field. All right.
But this where it plays in for people out there that will catch it is that we now recognize that when people start to receive big grafts of organs and tissues from other people,
yes,
like heart and lungs, they also begin to acquire the character of those people.
That's quite true.
And people say, well, it's cellular memory, but I'll tell you, after working with cells for the last 40 years, the cells don't have that kind of memory processing where they can tell chicken McNuggets and beer from anything else. The reality is that the people who donated the organ, their identity is still playing through it.
Apparently.
Yes, and so in a sense, Pearsall's book on Change of Heart was interesting because he talked about a whole number of these, even to the extent that a young girl or woman, I forgot what age it was, received a heart from a younger girl that got shot, killed. And when she acquired this, she was later able to lead the police to the murderer.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you have to say, where's this information coming from?
Yes.
And this is what just shocked me because I realized it's a broadcast. We're made in the image of the field in a biblical sense. We're made in the image of this broadcast. And if I take your set of receptors and put it on a completely different, like an embryo just coming into the world, you'd be playing back again.
All right, Doctor, has there ever been any measurement, I'm trying to think of how to ask you this, indicating that there's something emanating from us that can be measured, or is it occurring in a way that it's going to ultimately not be measurable until we have some sort of quantum receiver or something. What I'm getting at, I guess, here, let me lay it out for you. Have you been following the studies at Princeton?
About the field effect?
About the Human Consciousness Project, it's called.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, you good. You have been following that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, they have these graphs, and they're watching these eggs all over the world, geographically spread out, eggs meaning computers spitting out random numbers. Suddenly they get non-random and some giant event happens. I mean, 30 minutes before the Twin Towers are hit, kaboom, it goes 4 hours, in fact, goes off the charts. And it's happened with all these events. It's as though there's some sort of mass consciousness broadcast going on. And they've found, albeit perhaps at this stage a rather crude way, but a way to detect this.
And this is an important part of our evolution that we haven't caught on to, is because we keep looking at ourselves as these independent units.
Yes.
And we actually are cells in a larger organism called humanity. We are individual collective units in that organism. And our lesson, of course, is that we think that there are nations that separate, one person from another person. The reality is the lessons, when we get them, recognize there is one living thing on this planet called humanity, and that is the equivalent of that central voice that I was talking about. When cells come together in a community, they're controlled by this central voice. And the cells of humans on the community of humanity have the same thing. One of the interesting ones that I really like the most is a year after 9/11, exactly 1 year later, the anniversary, New York City. It's 2002 on September 11th, and of course, everyone is thinking. It's like 1 year. Of course, everything was playing over this whole thing, this 9/11.
That's right.
And the lottery that night in New York was the winner was 9/11.
That's a fact.
That is a fact, and it's interesting because it's like this isn't really a lot of coincidence. There's a part where we are involved with creating mass events through what we perceive.
So, this sets up so many things to think about. So if somebody laid out some sort of event, let me suggest one, just pluck one from my current thought process. That, for example, an ocean current was beginning to slow, and if not even stop, and then cause a freezing of Europe and all kinds of terrible things to occur. If this became generally accepted knowledge that this was happening, could it become, in that same way, a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that consciousness could have this... See, I did some experiments that just scared the holy you-know-what out of me. I actually got the audience to participate in the millions in trying to create some weather changes, Dr. Lipton, and by God, we did it. In areas where there wasn't supposed to be rain, none in the forecast, terrible drought, we made rain. And we did this one way or another about 10 or 11 times, and I finally got down to number 11. I said, that's it. I don't know what I'm doing with this. It scares me a little. It's real. There's no doubt about it. But I've got to stop here because I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, this is the biggest issue about that truth that you really came across and are influencing our world. And the problem that we have is because we find ourselves as being powerless as individuals and not responsible even, and then starting to have these thoughts, and we can be manipulated to like a war. And the fact is, here's an example, is that a soccer game, now, people don't generally go there because of the fight, okay? And yet the reality is, when these things break out, people who are pacifists in the middle of these things will get caught up.
And join in. And
that is because we are in the field, and we respond to the field as the cells in your body are in your own field, and your thought patterns are changing their behavior and their responses at the moment you have them, and people are in the same parallel relationship in this larger thing called humanity.
We have never really quite understood mob psychology, but there is a mob psychology, as
Absolutely.
You just pointed out. You get, whether you like it or not, no matter how level-headed you think you might be, if you're in the middle of it, you're going to get caught, more than likely, caught up in it.
Well, we know that, you see, every brain is a tuning fork, and it's broadcasting magnetic fields like crazy. And these are read with a device called it's the myoencephalograph, the MEG, not EEG, magnetoencephalograph. magnetoencephalograph. And the significance about that is that as you are processing information in your head, you're actually broadcasting magnetic fields that are altered to your thinking processes. And that these are being broadcast all the time. But then here's what science recently did. They were saying, look, we're measuring these magnetic fields coming out.
Yes.
What if we put magnetic fields back in?
Yes.
And as soon as they did that, people started to get hallucinations and senses. It just was like it so profoundly changed their perception of reality.
I think that actually, isn't that the process that produced what's known as a near-death experience?
Well, this has been part of it again, and it's part of it says that some way you can let go of the control that you actually are playing through these antennas, and that you can pull out of it. You can be out of your body and your intention be in the field,
exactly.
Or you can be in your body,
yes, and
you can be in either one. So there's in or out of body, and yet when you're in your body, there are a whole bunch of other parameters and things that you can experience that you cannot experience when you're out of body. So it becomes an interesting point. If we live both in and out, what are we doing in the body that's unique? And the answer is, well, if I just said you were just a spiritual entity alone, which we are. And I said, if you were just a spirit and you didn't have the body, what does chocolate taste like? Or what does a sunset look like? Or what does love feel like? And you wouldn't really be able to have an answer because all those are sensations that are derived from our physical bodies that translate the environment and convert it into electromagnetic frequencies that our brain is reading. So that light comes in the eye, but electric vibrations come out of the optic nerve. Sound comes in the ear. Electric vibrations come out of the oral nerve, and any nerve that's sending information from the outside will convert whatever the information is on the outside to an electromagnetic vibration. So in a real sense, we're sort of like Earthlanders. We get the chance to get into this body and sense a reality using ourselves as mechanical transducers to convert the world into things that we perceive now.
All right, then. Let me give you a scenario and ask you if this would work, all right? Let's say that I became aware that through MRI or something, that I had some sort of tumor.
Yes.
Could I, over a period of time, go into a meditative state and virtually will that tumor to shrink and eventually disappear all together?
Yes.
Could I be successful? I mean, is that
is the
practical application of what
it.
The practical application of what everything we're talking about right now?
Yes, this is, and people do this on a daily basis, and it's very important because we are told to don't look at that. That's not real. Okay, and we keep getting shunted away from people who do these things because it's not in the interest to broadcast this kind of information. I said the placebo effect is a fundamental reality of how you can heal yourself, and yet we don't ever try to leverage it. We don't even try to study it.
Well, have you gotten down to specifics? I mean, could you actually give somebody instruction on how they should proceed if they wanted to follow this regimen of treatment and try and actually just simply cure themselves?
There's a nice pathway to go on this, and it has to deal with the fact that we have two minds, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, and we have to recognize the difference between the two and recognize that the subconscious mind is essentially the entire brain. The conscious mind is coming really from the forebrain region, a smaller portion of it, that the subconscious mind is 1,000,000 times more powerful in processing information than is the conscious mind, that the subconscious mind is a complete stimulus response mechanism. It is a tape player. There's nobody in there. It is programmed, and especially the first 6 years of our lives, our brain activity is designed that we actually don't express alpha activity, which is consciousness, until about 6 years of age. That the first 6 years, our brain is predominantly in delta and theta, which is called the hypnagogic state. And it is during those first 6 years that we learn all the rules of fitting into human society. And in addition, during that hypnagogic state, we also identify characters about ourselves that we are told by the outside people, like our parents, And we then record that in the subconscious mind, and here's the problem with the subconscious mind. There's nobody in there. It's a push-button response. As people say, oh, my God, that guy pushed my buttons.
Bruce, is this why, for example, I can have a really intractable, I work a lot with electronics, an intractable problem. I just can't figure it out. I can work day and night to the point where I'm just ready to collapse in sleep and so angry that I can't figure it out. And so I go to sleep thinking about the problem. Mm-hmm. And so many times, Doctor, I wake up the next morning and sometimes within 10 minutes of waking up, if not right away, I somehow have figured out during the night, during my sleep, what was wrong, and I go in and kaboom, I fix what I couldn't fix otherwise in 2 days of conscious effort.
Like you, these very brilliant people in this world, from Newton to Einstein down, have all said the same kind of thing, is that they let go of the thing, and they go out, and frequently it's an out-of-body issue, and at night, of course, this is an opportune time for doing that the information is out in the field in that we can download it, but the conscious mind can interfere with that. And this is the interesting part. It's sort of like the harder you try to do something, what is it? Just you have to stop for a second and say, I'm making an effort, I'm working hard to get this done.
That's right.
The question is, why are you working hard? Give me the premise. And the premise is there somewhere is because the answer is not going to come easy, so I'm going to work hard. And guess what? Now it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your belief underlying it is, if it was going to come easy, you wouldn't have been working hard in the first place. So your belief is, it's not going to come easy.
That's right.
And then you work harder, and the harder you work is the less likely it's going to come until you realize, until you give up. And the moment you give up, then the information is available to come in. But when you are working hard at something, it's a reason for it is there's an underlying belief that says it's not going to come easy. And so, therefore, you perpetuate this by aggressively trying to get it to, make the world work the way you want. And it's like, no, you're pushing it farther away. And when you let go, and especially when you can be out of body, you have all this information available to you. It's bringing it back in. That's the hard part.
I certainly have experienced that, and I would imagine many, 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 many people in this audience have also experienced that. I mean, it's just an absolute truth, but the trouble is we've never known why it's true. It's all right, hold on, we're at the bottom of the hour. It may be that the instinctual knowledge that people have, that some of the kind of information you're hearing this morning is genuine and real, a sort of an instinctual knowledge, even though it seems far out and, kind of off into the, touchy-feely category, right? But people have this instinctual understanding that what they're hearing is the real McCoy, and I think that accounts for all the interest in it, Doctor.
Well, I just want to give an opportunity to tell the audience that my website, brucelipton.com, has freely downloadable articles and references on everything we're talking about, because I didn't come into this because I was a wishful thinker and looking for spirituality. I had actually no handle on that at all and wasn't even looking for it. It was the cells that revealed it. And so what we're talking about is a scientific understanding that we're evolving. And this is why, for example, as you said, your program is starting to pick up. Things are going to start picking up because we are indeed on a course of an evolutionary jump, which, interesting enough, may even be actually by the time the Mayan calendar day 2012 arises, might actually manifest itself by then. So that there's a real change going on, and the world looks really freaky and scary, a lot of it, and it's interesting because it's sort of like a transformational time for human civilization. We're leaving behind the victimhood, and that we are evolving another level of consciousness as a community, not as an individual, but our community will start to become more self-conscious, more mammalian in its character, while the current kind of civilization is more of a reptilian civilization. It's conscious, but not self-conscious, and that's what's happening. We've been conscious of what we're doing, but not self-conscious, meaning, and that's the character of mammals, is that what you do today, when you're self-conscious, you actually plan what you do today based on what influence it has tomorrow.
Doctor, is there any way for you to impart an understanding to? So I understand that, for example, two cells separated by, it doesn't matter how far, one in Moscow and one in the U.S., two cells that have been together are shown to have this, they react together in some way that would imply a communication at a level that we don't begin to understand, that goes through time and space and everything else, and instantly.
And they're entangled, and they're also tuned into the same broadcast. And that's what happens. That's like Cleve Baxter's work, really phenomenal stuff in that regard.
That's right.
And basically it says why the cells and the individual at distances respond to each other, because both the cell and that individual are using the same coded antennas, receiving essentially the same broadcast. And the broadcast is not localized; it's throughout the globe, so that wherever the cells are, they're going to instantaneously download what the other cells are experiencing in their environment, no matter
throughout
how
the
far
globe
away.
And maybe well beyond, maybe anywhere. Maybe time and
Absolutely.
space is simply not a barrier to this communication, but it's so far beyond my understanding.
It's interesting because there's a great analogy that to try to understand the relationship of a human on this planet and that energy that comes into it. The analogy is the mariner. The mariner, we send that to Mars because we can't go to Mars, and we want to know what Mars, the experience of Mars would be. So we send up a device, and it doesn't even look like a human.
Right.
But the reality is, it is completely set up with all kinds of human detection systems, cameras to see what's going on, temperature receptors to read the temperature, taste receptors to read the composition of what's going on. All these things are ways that, like a human would experience, and that information is gathered by the mariner and sent back by an antenna to the guy at NASA. Mm-hmm. Now, the guy at NASA is driving the vehicle, so he sends information to that vehicle via the antenna,
right.
And the information's downloaded, and then the experience of driving, the guy at NASA catches on how to drive by actually driving the vehicle and getting the feedback coming back from the system when he does certain maneuvers.
Okay, but I understand at what level and how that communication occurs, or at least the electromagnetic portion of it. I understand the physics of how that works. We don't begin to understand the physics of how the kind of cellular communication we were just talking about occurs. We don't even begin to...
We're beginning to do that now because we're beginning to realize the conventional medicine has been looking at molecules in a Newtonian fashion, like they're lock and key, like two chemicals come together like puzzle pieces.
Yes.
And new physics is looking at the same molecules, the proteins that make up the body, and have recently, in the last few years, have totally been blown away by what they recognize is that the proteins respond to quantum mechanical fields,
mm-hmm.
and that they're responding not to Newtonian fields at all. And why is this relevant? Because all of a sudden the interest about vibrations, harmonic resonance, constructive, destructive interference in the field is what's controlling the biology, and not the direct chemistry of a drug and a chemical interaction, for example. and it's hard because conventional biology does not, the people that are in that field, I was in that field, okay? And I could tell you, if I went around to ask physics questions to my colleagues in cell biology, I would get answers that were so weird because basically biologists, including myself when we did our stuff, never trained in physics. That would be you wouldn't jeopardize your grade point average to take a physics course to go to graduate school in biology.
Yes.
And this is part of my wake-up call when I started to realize how this mechanism at the cell membrane worked. It's actually an organic computer chip, and that the keyboard are these antennas, and the antennas resonate like tuning forks to the environmental signals. So as a cell is in the field, there's all these tuning forks on the cell that are picking up complementary signals and converting those into biological information and then operating the cell. So all of a sudden, those things that become quantum mechanical weird become biological weird, and action at a distance and all these other kinds of things like that.
Yeah, so to put all this into practical application, Doctor, I mean, people instinctively, I think, understand there's really something here. But you're fighting a a well-established medical and scientific community that's going to say what you're talking about is just hogwash. And for what you're suggesting to work, people must believe it's true. Therefore, it must be proven conclusively, scientifically, and you've got some big barriers to overcome.
Well, yeah, but we also are beginning to actually, those barriers are falling, and that's why, like, the references on the website are very helpful. These are current things that are completely changing our established view. We've been sort of like horses with blinders on, being led down a path of genetic control, when it turns out that the reality is very clear now that whole thing was false. It didn't work that way. The Human Genome Project was a failure. A failure in what regard? It goes this way, is that we believe genes control life. To have that belief be real, we needed in excess of 140,000 genes to make a human being, and that was the minimum number. And it turns out the Human Genome Project reports that we only have 25,000 genes. We have the same number of genes as some of the most primitive organisms on this planet. And all of a sudden that emphasis that said, your answers are going to be in the genes, and it turns out they're not there. And that's why this is an exciting time, because letting go of the genes is the opportunity and step to say, if it's not the genes, then what is it? And that's when we get into, it's the way a cell perceives the environment and responds to the signals. And once you start to do that, you say, well, you're made out of cells, and the answer is, yep, all of them are perceiving the environment, and the images that our brain sends regard to those perceptions are then what control the cell. So that, in fact, for example, we find out that 95% of cancer does not have a hereditary linkage, meaning it's not genetic running in families. 95% of cancer are people who get cancer by their response to the environment. And recently, even the American Cancer Society, the Cancer Society just came out like 10 days ago or something. They finally came out with a statement. It's an underestimate, we'll say right now, but they came out with a whopping 60-some% of cancer is totally avoidable by changing lifestyle and diet. And why is this important? Because we have been continuously groomed on the belief that we are victims of these genes. And then that's a belief. And then we expect things to happen. And when we start to expect things to happen, we don't realize that an expectation is a command from the central voice organizing the cells to select the program to meet the expectation.
Self-fulfilling prophecies.
It's exactly what it is. And I wasn't a religious person, and you go back to all the great prophets that came throughout time, and almost every one of them to a T said, it's how you believe your life is.
Yeah, oh, yes,
that's what it's all about.
Well, there is value in that, but I mean, you don't have to be of a specific religious persuasion.
No, it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with belief.
Yes. Yes.
And it's a belief about whether you think you are a victim, whether you think you have any power, and it becomes important because, and then all of a sudden, because people will then say this way, well, listen, Bruce, I listen to what you said, and I have these positive thoughts, and I keep having these positive thoughts. These are my beliefs, and guess what? My life didn't change. And I'm going to say, yeah, I can understand why, because your positive thoughts come from your conscious mind, which processes presumably something on the order of 40 bits of data per second, and that's your conscious mind. And the subconscious mind, in the same time, is processing about 40 million bits of data, and the subconscious mind has all the programs in it. And here's the point. We didn't put most of those programs in we didn't have consciousness. Most of the programs were established before we were 6 years of age. We were in that mindset where the subconscious mind was downloading all the rules and requirements to fit into society, so that a child doesn't have to be coached by his parents, just has to observe how its parents behave. It is a download, and it becomes that way. Well, here's the problem. Now you're older, and your conscious mind says, I really deserve to be healthy, and I really deserve to be prosperous. And how come I'm working so hard and it's not happening? And then there's a tendency to say, the world's not giving it to me. And the reality is, when we find out, is mostly our subconscious has been programmed with limiting beliefs. And they say, well, what kind of limiting beliefs? I say, well, go to a supermarket near rush hour. Watch the parents of a child who's acting up because the child wants something at that store. And let's say the kid's less than 6, and he's going through a tantrum because I want this. And the parents are yelling at him, you don't deserve that. What people haven't recognized, if that child's less than 6, That's a straight download into the subconscious. And that is a program. If it's repeated, the child will get the belief it doesn't deserve something, not in its conscious mind, in the subconscious mind. So here's the issue. Now the person's operating down the street, and they're operating at a 40 bits per second with positive thoughts that I deserve to be successful. And then 40 million bits of data down below in the subconscious are saying, the program says I don't deserve things. And guess what? While you're not seeing it, you will sabotage yourself because the body and the brain have to be coherent. If the brain says you don't deserve something and you get something, that will cause conflict in the entire system. And the brain will, therefore, the subconscious will sabotage you. And then the issue is, well, I didn't see that. And if I give this one point, maybe it'll make things clear. When you first got your driver's permit and you got in that car, you were driving with a conscious mind. You know how hard it was, if you think back, of trying to keep everything in your mind at the same time, the gauges, the pedals, the mirrors, looking out the window. It was staggering. Once you learn how to drive, it's now in the subconscious mind, the program. You don't have to think about it. So today you get in the car, you put the key in, and you're at the store. You haven't thought about one detail about exactly how to drive the car. It's automatic now. Okay, now here's the catch, and if you get this one, then it makes all the sense in the world what happened. It goes like this. Now that we know how to drive this well, we can get so involved with a discussion with somebody in the car that all of a sudden, if you're driving the car, you look out the window and you realize you actually haven't paid attention to the road for the last 10 minutes.
That's right.
And now here's a point. The conscious mind was engaged in the discussion. Who was driving the car? The subconscious mind. Now here's the catch. If you could get it, this is the whole catch. And I say, okay, your conscious mind's the discussion. The subconscious mind's driving the car. I ask you, did you observe how you drove the car during that 10 minutes? And the answer is, no, you didn't. Your mind was engaged in the discussion.
That's right.
And here's the point. Then you had no idea the actual way you drove the car, because when your conscious mind's busy, the subconscious mind, by its definition, is running the show. But your conscious mind was busy, so it didn't see. And here's the point. Then all the programs that are in our subconscious mind is now demonstrated as a clear point. 95% of our daily activity comes from this unconscious mind, meaning 95% of your life is playing from this part of the mind that you don't observe when it's doing it. And most importantly, the fundamental programs that you're operating from were actually programmed into your awareness before you were even conscious. And it's all you have to do is recognize, were you one of those kids that was like in that store and you heard from your parents, you're just an average kid. You don't deserve things. You're stupid. You're not smart. You can't play music. You're not good at art. Why? If these were in the program, then the subconscious mind with, 1 million times more power is going to play that program, even if the conscious mind is saying, I can do it, I can do it. Well, it's like shouting into the hurricane. It's like, no, the wind's blowing the other way here, because the subconscious mind is so much more powerful. That's why you talk about, well, then you have to use willpower. And the answer is, yeah, you're fighting yourself. And the issues are, and you brought up earlier, can you do something about it? And the answer is, at some point, yes. If you identify the programs that are limiting you in this subconscious mind, you can rewrite them. But here's the failure, and this is, people's got to hear, the failure is this. There's nobody in the subconscious mind. Trying to talk to yourself and say, oh, I don't like that behavior, and I don't want to do that again. Well, that's nice, but you didn't, there wasn't anybody there. The subconscious mind's a tape player. So I might as well give you a cassette tape, and then you put it in your player and you push play, and then you realize you don't like that tape, and then so what do? You yell at the tape. Come on, play something different. I'm tired of this. Play something different. The point is this: how much yelling at the cassette tape is going to cause the program to change? And the answer is, you can yell till you're blue in the face.
That's right.
The idea is what? There's nobody there. You have to go through a process, and there are processes that you can now get into these subconscious behaviors that we can't see, that operate most of the time and control our lives. And that's why our consciousness is looking out the other side thinking, why is life so hard? As if the universe doesn't want to give you something. And we don't realize that we were sabotaging it on our own because we don't see that tape when it plays. I mean, all you have to do is talk to some people that you know that you can see that they're just like their parents, and you say, you know, you're just like your mom. And when you say that to some woman, she will probably just shrink and go, what, are you kidding me? And the reality is, why?
Yes.
They cannot see the mother's program, which they got in the first 6 years. When it's playing, they can't see it.
No, of course not. They're the frog in the slowly heating water is what they are.
And so that's why you say, so what's our issues with our lives? And most of the issues with our lives are the fact that that very sensitive period, which actually starts about midway through pregnancy and through the first 6 years of our lives, we are acquiring programs of how to deal with life that are from other people and not from our own consciousness.
All right, hold it. The Good Doctor's book is The Biology of Belief, Unleashing the Power of Consciousness. And I suppose in that book you describe exactly how to unleash that power. Is that correct?
Well, we describe how it works and how you can get to it. And it's a book, and it's a science book written for the lay audience. And if they go to the website, there's a place on there they can get information on the book. They can actually read a chapter because its design was to take that leading edge science and make it everyday kind of knowledge.
I think that's very wise. A lot of authors are deciding to put their first chapters up on the web, and it's a very effective strategy.
Well, it gives them a chance to see what they're getting into. I mean, I bought
right.
like Stephen Hawking's Beyond Time and got about halfway through and started realizing I'm reading the same chapter over and over and over again, and then put it on the shelf only to find that almost everybody else that I know who got the book ended up doing the same thing, and that is if you make the science that complex, it lost the value. So you can write it, and this is what the opportunity is to see, that you can write about science and make it readable.
All right. Your work would suggest neo-Darwinian theory does not fully reflect how life arose on the planet. Does this new biology support evolution or creationism in a way, or what?
It does both of them at exactly the same time. It says that there was a field, and the field is what gives shape to the matter as much as a magnetic field gives shape to iron filings. You can sprinkle the iron filings throughout the field. They just form random things. But when you put a field like a magnet in around it and you sprinkle the filings, they can form to the field. So the field was here, and yet the cells, you couldn't take 50 cells and make a human. You actually had to like bootstrap it. You start building something smaller, and then ultimately organism appeared after organism as a hierarchy. So there was an energetic form, in a sense, there before, and then there was a process of evolution to reach that form in the end. And it's a wonderful solution because it says both are right. And that's really the way we have to go into the future, is to sort of mend these such disparate views that we have about the world, because they all have to make sense. And that's why it's interesting, as the book describes, if you understand these mechanisms, allopathic medicine and the way we follow that, and complementary medicine with its emphasis on the energy systems of the body, and spiritual healing on the energy systems of the field, all make sense on this common biology. So I think we're really coming to a grand evolutionary jump, which is imminent and necessary.
All right. I want to bring some listeners online. Let them ask questions. How would that be?
I'm ready.
All right. Let's see how they digested it. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Dr. Lipton.
Hello, Dr. Lipton. This is an honor to be able to speak with you, and I need to ask you this question. I'm calling from Oregon, and my first 7 years of childhood I have no memory of. And I'm back at the place of my birth now. And I am finding something very strange. First of all, I've been trying to find an explanation for this for years. I thought God was being kind to me because it was a very abusive, extremely bad childhood. My mother tried to poison me. I was placed in a foster home and such. And I know the power of the mind. In fact, I'm almost 50, and people marvel because I have no wrinkles. And I reject... I figure I was robbed because I didn't have that childhood, so I reject my biological age, and I believe that's why I look so young.
Huh.
And
I agree with you, too.
And I know that, the Scripture says, as a man thinketh, so he is.
Yes.
But this is my problem. I have only been here for 4 years. I'm almost 50. And I go places. I'll tell you what happened one day, and this is what's made me almost fearful to go out of my house, and I really want to deal with this or move. Something has to give. A friend asked me to take him to a house on Main Street here. I took him to the house, and I was sitting there in the vehicle waiting for him, and I looked over to my to my right, and I noticed that the house next to me was the same backyard that as a child I used to go steal food from because we were abandoned and left and we were starving. And I was trying to feed my siblings and myself. It was a bright, beautiful, sunny day. I jumped out of my vehicle and I thought, oh, I want to check this out. And I get out and I go to the fence and I tell you, it was like a big, huge, black, horrible cloud came at me and I literally ran to my vehicle and started crying.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to deal with this.
All right. Something, in other words, she blocked out 7 years, Doctor,
yes.
of an extremely bad experience, it sounds like.
And a lot of it she wasn't even conscious through most of it anyway, so a lot of the programs got in there even without any consciousness, and so it may seem like a blackout and it wasn't even there in the first place.
It's as though something pierced through and suddenly reminded her of something.
It's stimulus response. It's the push button. It's the same kind of thing that some people out there in the audience will know. They get a certain smell, and all of a sudden that smell takes them right back to something early in their life.
That's right.
And the fact is this, is that our experiences are like snapshots, but not just with eyes, but all the senses make a recording at that moment. The more intense the experience, the more intense even the smell, the sound, the other things that were not the main thing. But why is that important? Because it's sort of the body immediately says anything that is threatening of life. It will learn that, and every detail that happened at the same moment becomes part of that image. So if any other time you come back and find those stimuli come back in the field, it will immediately replay that tape again. And so that apparently this whatever was horrible, that was so horrible that when these stimuli came into your field, immediately you had to shut it down because you did this when you were a child as well. And it was really important in that these are playback programs. These are the ones that, when people say somebody pushed my buttons, in this case, some place pushed your buttons.
That's right.
And immediately played that. And you got to get back to that. And this was the critical point, as I said, that our general belief is like cognitive therapy. So you go all these years, you hear all of the abusive events, replay them all over again every time you hear them, and now you become consciously aware. And the issue is, did you change anything in the original subconscious program? The answer is no. and that is why it's not very successful until you go back in and change the program. A variety of ways to do that. Energy psychology is the new field of changing it, because you're really changing your memories, and the memories are not in the system. The memories are in the field, so to speak. And so that energy psychology rewrites the field.
Okay, here's one for you. Doctor, here's one for you. I lived for 10 years on the island of Okinawa in the Far East, now Japan. And I remember the instant that I got off the airplane, touched ground at Kadena Air Base on Okinawa, I walked out of the plane, and suddenly, of course, here I am on another continent, halfway around the world, and or an island in this case, and I walked off the airplane, and a certain smell hit me. Not a negative smell, as people might be chuckling or something, but like a whole different world smell. And I can still recall that just like yesterday. And when I recall that smell, I recall the years, the very pleasurable years. I loved my time in the Japanese culture, and that smell is the key for me.
Mm-hmm. And these are because, as I said, every memory is really is like a holographic snapshot that all your senses are recorded at that moment.
Yes.
Not just the visual ones,
yes,
but every other one as well.
Exactly. All right, International Line, you're on the air with Dr. Bruce Lipton. Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Lipton, I am so glad that you're on the air tonight. I wanted to talk about, I've worked through it now, but I had dissociative disorder, multiple personalities, because I was abused all of my childhood, horrible, horrific abuse. And I had been diagnosed with lupus in my early 20s, and as I started working through my memories and all, about 5 years in, when I would go to the doctor, they would say, you don't have that anymore. And you don't get cured from lupus. You have a certain antibody that's measured in the blood, and it was always there, and then it wasn't there anymore. And that's when I had learned that when I was, maybe more one personality, it was there, and then as I started to integrate...
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, as I started to integrate my personalities, it was gone.
In another personality, it was gone. Wow.
It was gone, and I don't have it anymore. Because
Exactly.
now I'm more, I'm well, my personalities are integrated, I've worked through, I've gone back and been in therapy and talked about the abuse, brought it all to the front of my mind, in my now conscious mind, which was, it's an extremely, extremely difficult thing to do. And but my thing now is what you're talking about. I know in my conscious mind that I am a worthwhile person, that I can function in society, I can do this, but then I will go, it must be my subconscious mind, and I will go and sabotage myself because for all those years, my parents were telling me, you need to be punished for this, you need to, you were bad, you need to, and a lot of it had to do with money in the house. And
all right, well, obviously, Doctor, the audience, including this young lady, certainly has been listening intensely to what you've been saying. She had lupus in one personality. That changed, and it was no longer there. How common is this? Because it certainly centrally supports everything you've been saying.
It's so common, it's hard to explain because it's connected to psychoneuroimmunology. Immunology is the mechanism from which the lupus is derived. And in fact, by definition, it's called an autoimmune disease, which means, by definition, self-destructive. And so that whatever personality you were in at that personality, that was the one that whatever you were programmed with at that point took away value from your life so that you take away yourself. And in that process, you're devaluing, like if you heard you weren't worth anything, okay? If this was the kind of talk that was in the program, then that is the subconscious program. 95% of your daily events come from this program.
Got it.
And that will repeatedly cause you to try to devalue yourself. And that's where essentially autoimmune diseases come from.
All right, let's talk about AIDS for a moment. How would this relate to those afflicted with the with AIDS?
And it becomes very important about your belief system about this in regard to if you buy into the guilt trip and you were programmed with the guilt trip, then you find yourself being self-destructive because you see that your character or style of life is in complete competition with all the programming that you get, that this is so out of being normal. Then you have, obviously, now you have this internal conflict where your subconscious mind is observing and saying, my God, this isn't normal. This isn't even worth being here at some level. Now, why is this different? Because other people can get the AIDS virus and make the antibodies and never express the AIDS.
It's true.
And they have a whole different mentality about who they are and how they fit. AIDS is the big one. I'll give you a simpler one because it's more common to people, and that's like fever blisters. Fever blisters are due to a herpes virus.
Right.
It's a lifelong thing. You got it, it's there your whole life. And interestingly enough, sometimes the person gets it and has it once. And then sometimes people get it, and then every month or two it comes back out again. They got the same virus. What was causing it to come out? And the answer is stress. That the herpes virus will not express itself when you're not under stress. When you're under stress,
right,
then the virus will manifest itself.
Right.
It's very similar, the same thing with AIDS. If you're not under that stress, you can have this virus, and it's not going to really destroy you. But if you are living under the stress, then it conforms to what is called opportunistic organisms.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of us is infected right now. You can take a blood sample from everybody, and everyone's going to have bacteria and viruses in their own blood, and they're going to say, but Bruce, I don't feel sick, and there's nothing wrong with me, and yet I'm infected. And the answer is, all of us are infected, but when we're in a state of good mental health, the immune system is encouraged to work.
Mm-hmm.
When we're in stress, the stress hormones shut off the immune system. And it's not to sabotage you, but usually the stress is not from within, it's from without. And so the body, to conserve energy to deal with the stress from an outside threat, will shut off things in the body to conserve that energy to mobilize it for the threat. Well, the immune system is an internal system. So if you find stress in the world outside, the adrenal hormones, which are the marker of that stress, as they elevate, actually shut off the immune system. Medical doctors for years used that when patients received a foreign graft or organ and they didn't want the individual to reject the graft, they gave them stress hormones. And the reason is it reduced the function of that immune system. So all of us are infected. When we're in a good state of mind, we're healthy, and you get stressed. As soon as you get stressed and you start to remove the coverage of the immune system, these opportunistic organisms will start to take over, such as the herpes virus. When you're in a good place, no herpes, no fever blister. The moment you get stressed, fever blister.
I can hear a lot of people going, yup, that's right. All right, west of the Rockies, you're on the air with Dr. Lipton. Hello.
Hello. Glad to speak with you.
I'm glad to hear you.
Yeah, Art, I have a question for you. With all the mind consciousness experiments in which I participated in, if the doctor had his choice to do an experiment with all of his expertise, what would he choose to do an experiment in using your program, touching tens of millions of people to maybe get a verification?
All right, just as a mental exercise, we can do that, sure. All right, Doctor, if we have, or seemingly have concluded that the power of many minds is indeed a greater power. I don't know whether you agree with that or not, but the concentration of millions of minds on some manifestation is greater than that of a single mind with respect to world events or the environment or however you would apply it. And the question was, if you could have your choice to have millions of minds attempt to do something, what would you try?
Well, my attempt, of course, is to really see that we're going someplace. As a civilization, we're in a very important state of flux right now, and we could get there easier, except that there's a lot of resistance from the people in the establishment because it really means an undoing of the power structure and a redistribution of the power back to the individuals, us, in this process, and that we're going to go through this evolution. Do we need to struggle and fight? And the answer is no. Can we become more conscious? And that's really what the destination is all about.
So your wish for the concentration of millions of minds would be?
To open up consciousness so that people will realize that they are creating their world, and as a result, there's a responsibility to make that creation in such a way as to provide for the survival of the planet and ourselves. So it's like owning responsibility because we are that powerful, as you've demonstrated by collecting that power.
So you simply want it understood. Your wish would be for it to be understood universally.
Absolutely, because the evolution is just an evolution of awareness, and that's basically what it is. When we stop long enough one day to recognize, I am not a victim, I am powerful, I just have to stop buying the victim mentality and separate myself from the images. I mean, for example, one of the important ways that I find of surviving and doing very well on this planet is not to participate in everybody else's view of the horror that
yes.
it is. It's not horrible, except that if you get enough people to believe it is, then that manifestation is real. I'm looking for this evolution. It's going to happen. It could happen easier, but I have a feeling we're going to have to hurt a little bit in the process of learning it.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right. Hold on, Doctor. Here's a good one from Dino in Leawood, Kansas, who says, does the doctor think, because we're so conditioned to think we're going to die at a certain age, that we believe we're going to die at a certain age, that it causes it to happen? Doctor?
This is very, very much right on exactly what it's all about. And even our own collective belief that we live to be 90 as a ripe age is actually turning out to be a great misunderstanding that we probably could live to be easily 140 years or more with our understanding of the new biology, which is important because it said that actually one of the things that's causing us to age the most is our food, that we're eating ourselves to death. That they found that all long-lived organisms that appeared to be mutants, they wanted to find out what genes were controlling what gave them long life, and it turned out every long-lived organism actually was a defective mutant. It interfered with their digestion, and they thought, well, what if you just reduce the food? And then all of a sudden they found that they started to put these lab animals on minimum, absolute minimum, like starvation diet level.
Yes.
Doubled their lifespan.
Doubled their lifespan. Because the byproducts of the food, apparently, especially the free radicals, are very destructive of the nervous system, and that is one of the primary reasons why we go that way. And then, of course, the secondary reason is when you expect to go, because it's a conditioned belief that becomes, remember, we're all these tuning forks, that you're talking about how does that thought manifest itself when a large number of people get together is because if you get all the tuning forks to be coherent and start playing the same beat in a sense, that the number of people that get involved actually cause things to become materialized. Doctor, wasn't it the Native Americans who had and I think some Eskimos as well, who had a custom that basically when they were going to die, they either went off into the wood as a Native American and just sat for a few hours and then died, or launched themselves on an iceberg out into the middle of nowhere and promptly died. In other words, they had some sort of ritual involved. They knew they were going to die, and sure enough.
Yeah, and it was easy for them as well because they never had a doubt that there was this other side of this life, this transitional phase, that they never had any doubt about the reality of their continued existence in this environmental field. And of course, when we have doubt about that, then the last thing you really want to do is die, because then you think, well, that's the end. And these people, they had no fear of that, and their lives were completely different in that regard. And look, people who lose loved ones die almost like that themselves. Many people that lose a loved one will die within a very short time because nothing was wrong with them. It was just that they just felt that the continuation of life at that point wasn't worth it.
And so their brain promptly cooperated?
Yes.
And, yeah, I get it.
And the cells were obedient.
Right. I've got it. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Dr. Lipton. Good morning. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, hi. How are you today?
Just fine, sir.
Hey, thanks very much. I appreciate the conversation. There's so much that can be talked about in this fascinating field, so thank you, Dr. Lipton, for being on the air.
Well, thanks for listening. That's even better.
Yeah, right on. So I've been sitting here thinking what to ask, and I kind of I'm curious about how our behavior is affected by, like, electromagnetic fields right around the body. In reading and listening to people who talk about, chakras that have a tangible effect either within a Newtonian plane or some quantum plane. So I'm curious, like the concept of a spiraling energy, let's say a spiraling energy out of the top of the head. From your framework, how does that affect our behaviors or our beliefs? And then how would, is it plausible then if we can change with our intent or, say, passing our hand through the top of our head to change that energy field dynamic and consequently affect our beliefs or behaviors?
Yeah, this has been a historic perspective that people have always known about their ability to control their behaviors with their beliefs, that it was an energy field. Mm-hmm. That is also known that from a scientific level, that we also know that external energy fields do influence biology.
That's where I wanted to go with this.
There's research for 100 years about electromagnetic fields and pulsing fields, turning cells on and off, their DNA synthesis, RNA, protein synthesis, their differentiation, their cell divisions, their behaviors, neural growth, on and on and on. Again, a lot of these references are all on my website. And why is it relevant is because All of these are published in mainstream scientific journals about energy fields influencing the fate of cells.
All right, Doctor, then what about the effect of brutish electromagnetic fields, broadcasting,
Yes.
cellular towers, high-frequency radio,
Yes.
that sort of thing? What about brutish fields like that? How do they affect us?
Well, they found this is that people are affected by fields based on the amount of stress they're experiencing in their life.
Huh.
Meaning that as you get more stressed, your own protective field starts to weaken and outside influences are greater, so that two people can be in the same field, one of them being affected by the field and the other one completely,
unaffected,
blocked by it. And it's the same thing as walking across coals. It's exactly the same thing, the hot coals, and that is, if you keep your beliefs strong, you surround yourself with this field that will prevent the heat from burning you. But if you start walking across and then, a moment, question that belief, the moment you question it, the field's gone.
Ouch.
And then the other thing about people in general health, yes, there are people who say, "Oh my God, a cold's coming around. I could get this cold," because now they're open to that belief. And yet, equally, there are a number of people who see the flu's coming around and say, "I will not get this. I don't have time for this, and I'm not going to get it." And guess what? They don't get it.
They don't.
And the same thing applies to doctors. The fact is, how many doctors come down with the things that their patients have? The answer is very, very few. And then you say, well...
Yeah, I've always wondered about that.
Are they different? Are they biologically different? The answer is no. There's a mindset that says, I'm the doctor. I can't have a sign on my door closed on account of illness. It doesn't make sense. And so their own belief system puts this field up. And what's this field? Well, it's an energy field. And what is it? It's like a membrane itself. It lets things in that you need in and blocks the things that would be detrimental to you. Mm-hmm. But when you get stressed, and this is where the experiments revealed that, those fields are out there and they're harmful to some, but not as so harmful to others. And the difference was, it wasn't the field then, it was more or less the status of the individual at that point, and because then their receptivity of the field. So it becomes important. And also, another thing about power, the higher the power, there's always this tendency, well, if a little power doesn't, change the cells, what if you crank up the power so you can see how fields affect cells? And it's interesting. It's inverse. The higher the power in the field, the less the cells pay attention to it. It's out of their physiological range. They look at that signal and say, this is not even relevant to biology.
Gotcha.
And so they don't pay attention to it. It's the subtle ones, because they're in the range of that communication level. So then you start talking about cell phones and that subtle power that's coming in, not the big high-tension lines over your head.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. Wildcard Line, you're on the air with Dr. Bruce Lipton. Good morning.
Hi, Dr. Lipton. Art, hi.
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 I was abused emotionally and sexually as a child, and up until now, it's my birthday, I'm 24, I've dealt with a whole slew of things, self-mutilation, drug abuse, suicide attempts, and now I have fibromyalgia and something called vulvodynia, which is basically pain in the vulvular area. And my question is, how do I deprogram my subconsciousness to stop beating myself up just constantly, or stop hating myself?
Yeah, she's right on the money.
Okay, and this is exactly the issues that we were talking about. These beliefs are in your subconscious, and everything you talked about was a response to a threat on your life, as well as a devaluation you felt for your own life.
Yeah.
And so every one of those is a manifestation, which says the original program that you got during this abuse is running all the time.
That's clear, Doctor. How does she stop it?
Well, there's a way of doing it. It's through energy psychology. There's a link on my website to a process called Psych-K. That's one of the number of them. So basically what it is a process where you identify the belief. You don't have to go back and experience it. You just have to say, what is keeping me from going forward? And then you check your system to see, does it offer you a belief that you can get out of this or not? I mean, you have to find what's your belief. We already know where yours is in this point. It's still at this other level, this destructive belief. So then, in the energy psychology process, like part of the Psych-K, you get into a brain balance state, which is it's a physical posture. It's a part of brain gym, NLP stuff. When you get into that, you get a balance of your right and left hemispheres. And because on our day-to-day lives, we're either in our right or our left. It sort of goes back and forth during the day.
But I'm not clear on this, how this is achieved. Is it a process of, are you talking about a process of meditation of some kind?
No, this can occur in about a 5-minute process.
A 5-minute process?
Yes. You identify the belief you want to change. You get into the whole brain position, which encourages both hemispheres to be synchronized. That opens up what is called an opportunity like super learning. That is what the characteristic of super learning. You get both hemispheres operating at the same time, and then you put in a positive statement while you're in the super learning state.
Okay.
And you can actually hear noise in your head because your entire experiential database is like conflicting, saying this statement you're making, it doesn't conform to what we say. And at some point, within a few minutes of repeating the statement while in a whole brain posture, super learning state, you actually rewrite these files, and they're eliminated because there's a point where you can actually feel the statement you're putting in has zero resistance. It's a physiological feeling. You can feel it. And at that moment, what you've done in a super learning state is take thousands of files of experience and rewrite the perception.
And so you've rewritten your own program.
You've rewritten your program, and it's not doing it through talking to the subconscious. It has nothing to do with that. In a sense, you first have to get into the brain balance state. That's like pushing a record button. And because when we learn our experiences, those early ones especially, we are in a brain balance state. So every experience has both like a logical component and an emotional component. If you then get older, and after you get out of that childhood age, you don't really stay in a brain balanced state. You're either in the emotional side or the logic side. Well, here's the point. Try to adjust, if you're in the logic side of your brain and you're trying to change a program, you haven't dealt with the emotional side of it because that's not operating now. And vice versa. If you're in the emotional side, then the logical things, what happen, don't make sense. And so, and the issue is brain balance opens up a window which leads to a status that's similar to super learning, and you actually can download a belief that will rewrite a database, and it usually takes about 5 minutes for each particular belief statement that you need to correct about the value of your life and who you really are, the divinity within you, which has been beaten out of you in that sense.
That's amazing. All right, east of the Rockies, you're on the air with Dr. Lipton. Hi.
Good morning, guys. I want to wish you both health and happiness.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Dr. Bruce, you mentioned 3 words earlier, quantum mechanical fields.
Yes.
And it's funny because that introduces a trinity into science, that, quantum physics is the physical, mechanical, technological, and fields is basically the variable.
Yes.
Now science is starting to be seen as the new basic religion, which is a trinity unto itself, being biological, chemistry, and philosophy. But it does break down into 2 things, being biological versus technological, the same way that the ultimate holy trilogy comes down to Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, blah, blah, blah. But it comes down to right and wrong. Okay, I didn't mean to go there. But as far as nanotechnology goes,
yes,
it's kind of a catch-22, isn't it? Who do you see winning out? Because you need nanotechnology to go ahead and get in there and influence cells, yet at the same time, can the cells overcome any nanotechnology that might be, tapped into or hacked into?
Well, yeah, what's the nanotechnology part that you're referring to that's required?
As far as diseases,
yeah.
As far as what has been propagated on this show even, especially through George's show for nanotechnology, from what they can do for diseases or the cells themselves. Does consciousness win out, or does technology win out?
The significance of the way I would look at it is that consciousness does, because the genetic system is highly adaptive, and it also does improvisation. In other words, the genetic system isn't controlling us, but the organism is adjusting its genes to conform and survive in its environment. So you can start by giving bacteria penicillin, and you kill most of them. Guess what? Some of them in there start to read that penicillin, change their genetic structure, and as a result create a protein that is displayed on the surface of the cell, like an antibody that blocks the penicillin. And then the intelligence goes one step further, and it says after it can block this penicillin, it can grab it and block it, it learns how to take the same molecule and break the penicillin, So after a short time, those bacteria that are first resistant,
that's right,
then learn to eat it. And all this says what? Is like, well, the technology, you could put something in the field, but guess what? Over a period of time, the intelligence of the system can control its environment and change its genetics to create what it needs to adapt and survive in an environment. And that's essentially how we got here. And the belief that it was Darwinian, that this was accident, in recent science, which is the stuff like described in the book, the recent science says, no, there are actual mechanisms that cells have to generate variation in their genes when they find stress, because the only way out is to change the system.
Well, that's really rushing the process of evolution right along, isn't it?
And that's why there have been mass extinctions, and in the briefest of time in regard to evolution, all new species came out.
Yeah.
It's like, and where'd they come from? It didn't come from Darwinian theory. It would have taken extra millions of years for them to show up. They show up in hundreds of thousands of years, not millions of years. It said, no, organisms are these devices, they're cells, that they are adaptable. They get into an environment, they read that environment, they adjust their biology to manifest a complement to that environment. And then, of course, it's the part where they read the environment when you translate that to humans. So do we read the environment, but then we also get teachers, and so that we buy these interpretations of the environment that we never even experienced, and we buy them from others, and then they become real as if we created them ourselves.
All right, your book, The Biology of Belief. When is everybody going to be able to get it?
It's available all the time. It's on Amazon.
All right. What about this first chapter? When are you going to put that up?
That's on the website right now.
Oh, you've already got it there.
You can go on the website. There's the Belief book. It says book site information. Click on that, and you'll get all the details of the book. And for those on this show that buy the book, actually, when they click on the website, brucelipton.com, there's also a free gift. If you buy a book from this show, you'll get a chapter from a wonderful book called Healing Yourself, Healing the Planet, an important insight into the fact that we are indeed on an evolutionary track right now that is going to cause something to happen in the next few years. And those people that are aware with consciousness are going to be able to get through this, and those people that are not acting with consciousness are going to be lost, and it's just going to be like a very strange world coming up. It's kind of strange every day now, actually.
Boy, you're not kidding.
Yeah, and we are on a destination. We are, in fact, leaving behind a reptilian society and acquiring a mammalian society, and that is, the difference is a reptilian society is run by dinosaurs, big corporations, with little awareness, and they think with a reptilian consciousness. So like Ike's reptilian people, they're there not in reptile form, they're there in consciousness, meaning that they're doing things today without ever thinking about what this means to our planet tomorrow.
All right, and on that note, we've got to go. We're out of time.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's been an absolute pleasure. What a classic show you've done. Doctor, thank you.
Thank you so much, Art.
Good night, my friend. All right, there he is, Dr. Bruce Lipton. That was quite a program, perhaps a classic.